Hello, I am Kris Nelson, coming to you with my technically second podcast. This one will be an expounding upon the truth is love, love is truth, most specifically dealing with the truth and frequency of perceptions and how that relates to what I call the Dualistic Conceptual Framework for understanding, conceiving, and navigating reality. I will be explaining some images that Mark Passio has come up with, and also developments of my own contemplations and imagination and how I conceive of things in the images that I've created, the diagrams I've created, and afterwards I will read two articles that I've previously written about the Dualistic Conceptual Framework and how it can help us greatly to understand reality. Just a little summary of this, why it's important. Our task is to bring ourselves, our perceptions, into alignment with truth, with what is, which is reality. Having a higher frequency of alignment, such as increasing the frequency of a small sound until it develops into a proper tone, is to turn a low frequency into a higher frequency tone with atonement. And if you break down atonement, it's at one ment, and that's at one mind, because ment is mind. And at one mind is what atonement means. If you look at the etymology of the word, atonement is about uniting and reconciling. So, at one mind, and atonement is uniting and reconciling ourselves with the truth / love / good / right, etc. All that I've talked about in the Truth is Love article. It's to be truly unified, harmonized, and integrated with our truer self, our higher self, the higher will, natural law, what is right, good, and true. Truth is the one thing, the essence that is, and permeates all, while the lack and absence of truth or love is lies, falsity, evil, fear, etc. In the frequency spectrum of light and how Mark Passio has described perceptions as a frequency in consciousness, the truth is the middle point in the oscillation as it goes up and down. So the frequency wave, as it oscillates, is centered on truth. That plane is in the middle, and it goes up and down around that truth and interacts with it in varying degrees of frequency, of more frequent contact or less frequent contact, to determine a higher or lower frequency vibratory rate of consciousness, and higher or lower perceptions being in alignment with the truth, what is, or reality. So the truth is absolute, it is extreme, it's one way. And when you go the other way, well, you're getting into less truth. You're getting into more fear. You're getting into more falsity, more evil, more lies, more deception, more illusions. So it's one direction. And to clarify on truth, there's essentially two types of truth in a broad sense, because there's a lot of confusion about, what is truth. The basic sense of truth is or has come into existence, and that is all the good and the bad, all the light and the dark, all the beauty and the horror, as it currently is. So that's accepting the current condition as it is, not accepting it as the way it needs to be, but just that's the way things currently are. That's the basic understanding of truth. Now there's a second side to it, the second type, and that is the truth of what is good, right, and true for us to actually align with and create, even if it doesn't yet exist, or if it only exists in a small amount and being created by only a few people. Using our tools to find it and then live it is what this is all about. We can, by creating good, right, truth, love, morality, by becoming it. You create it by aligning yourself with it and becoming it, living it in your life by example. So we begin with Mark Passio's image from What on Earth is Happening podcast 102, image 8. This was a basic representation of the line or plane of truth, and he has a low frequency oscillation vibration and then a high frequency, and he explains how this is the frequency of perceptions interacting and contacting the line or plane of truth. The more frequent the contact, the higher the frequency of contact with truth, and the more perceptions align with truth. It's about perceptions aligning with reality and therefore aligning with truth. Perceptions do not dictate reality. And then there's also the second image, which comes from the Natural Law Seminar and also the New Age Deception presentation. And this is a more colorful one representing 3 different frequencies, from the low to the high, from the red infrared to the blue violet ultraviolet, because it's using the comparison of the light spectrum. So in the light spectrum, you go from red to oranges and yellows and greens and teals and cyans and blues, indigos, violets. So that's just the way it's just going up in higher frequency. Perceptions can waver from the truth in varying degrees. Truth does not waver or change. It's that fixed line, and the perceptions need to align with that. What has occurred can't be changed. What has not occurred yet is not a truth that has manifested. It's a possibility that can manifest if we choose to create it. Higher frequency consciousness allows us to perceive and recognize more patterns, and inversely, with lower frequency consciousness, we don't recognize as many patterns because we're in less contact with the truth. Higher frequency is about perceptions being accurate. Increasing the frequency reduces the wavering from the truth, and eventually the wave becomes a line. The more the wavelength becomes compact and increases in frequency, eventually you would just have, instead of a bunch of zigzags up and down across the line of truth, through that plane of truth, you would just have all the zigzags lining up, and it would just look like one thick line, because you would be in such a high frequency contact with truth. So eventually the wave becomes a line because it's in the greatest alignment with truth. The third image and the fourth image are from Mark Passio's Natural Law presentations, and it's just to get a visual about how love is in the blue frequency because it's in the higher frequency, and fear is in the lower frequency, the red. And then we have, well, I'll get to that later about the varying degrees of alignment we can get into, but that's just what I want to show here, is that there's red and there's blue, and how this ties into the previous truth versus perceptions, about aligning our perceptions with reality and the truth. It's the same thing. Red is low, blue is high. In the next image, we can see how I created my own version of what Mark Passio created in the truth and perception frequencies. I just made mine a white background. I made it more visible, more easily to see, and I've added intersection points in yellow just to show that that's where the alignment occurs, is where these where it actually crosses through, and that's where alignment takes place. The next image is one I've made a while ago, and it had to do with Mark Passio's explanation of how good, light, warmth, hotness is what is, and the other thing that we're using as a comparison to understand it more is the absence of that, which would be bad or evil, dark or cold. So this is how I started to understand how we can get a greater degree of understanding about good and evil, truth and lies, any type of comparison that we can come up with to try to understand reality. It's basically a dualistic conceptual framework. So I called it, it's a continuum, a spectrum, a scale, a degrees, they're grades, because things are placed in reality in different grades. But just to go back to the previous image about truth and frequency of perceptions that I made, I just want to make some clarifications about the color green. Green is the middle frequency in this depiction. It's just using the color spectrum as a frame of reference here. So the green here isn't what is right and correct and accurate and optimal as other conceptions, such as when we view the left and right brain as the red and the blue, we want to bring unification represented by the green. We can call that balance. You want to balance the left and the right brain. That's true. There's other things, the masculine and feminine, balance the masculine and feminine. There's also the one eye, the third eye, bringing the heart and the mind into unification. We can represent that as green as well. There's certain things we can represent as green in terms of what's optimal and balanced, but that doesn't mean that green is always what is optimal, what is best, what is accurate, what is correct, what is right, what is true, what is good, what is love. It depends on the dualistic conceptual framework you're conceiving of and how you're applying it. So as we can see, green isn't always the optimal when we look at the frequencies. It's just a color to represent a middle frequency. We could use yellow, we could use orange, It's just between the red and the blue. It's a comparison using the frequency rate of the color spectrum. Red is lower than yellow, yellow is lower than green, green is lower than blue, blue is lower than violet. It's a representation that is to be understood in a certain specific way. So green is the midpoint when looking at the spectrum of light. What we look at doesn't always apply in the same manner. Conceptual frameworks need to be redesigned when we change the perceptual lens we're using to look at things. When we're comparing different things, such as the left and the right brain, masculine, feminine, heart and mind, we can represent that as the color green to bring them into a unification, into harmony and the balance, but not everything can be represented in the same way. It's not always about balance. I'll get to that shortly. Because balance is being used in a misconstrued way by the New Age movement to balance idiotic things like, oh, let's balance good and bad, which is retarded. You want to balance as much good as you do as much bad as you do? That's just idiocy. So balance isn't a term that I like to use because it's only applicable in certain ways if you're understanding what the balance really is. It's about taking two forces that work better together. And good and bad doesn't work better together. Truth and lies doesn't work better together. That's why truth is one way, good is one way, love is one way, rightness is one way, natural law is one way. We can also look at green as the unification of our lower and higher natures. There's a dual aspect to this as well. We can have the lower self and the higher self uniting to be a real human being. Because we aren't the higher self. We're in this existence here. We're not strictly that higher self. That's how we get to experience this. That's how our consciousness gets to manifest in the physical body so that we can experience, but we're not purely that. We're an aspect of the higher self. So the lower self would be the animalistic natures, I guess. And when we bring in parts of who we are designed in the animal form, and we bring in parts of the higher self, we can unite those together to become a real human being. In a way that sort of makes sense. You know, we don't want to be those lower natures. We don't want to be always fighting and all that stuff. So it's not really about uniting the fighting with the truth and the love and the good, but it's uniting our lower selves here, that would, if we can imagine it void of any higher self of truth, good, and love, and rightness, and morality, and natural law. We want to bring that natural law to us in this lower plane so that we can become true, real human beings that are progressively embodying more and more of the characteristics, properties, and attributes of the higher self. We can't be the higher self completely, but we can embody aspects and degrees of it, because it's beyond full embodiment. We can't embody the higher self completely because it's not where we are. We are here. We're not over there. We're not in that other realm. We're not in that allness. We're not in that source. We're not in that spirit. We're an aspect of it. So I just want to make that clear. We can also apply the comparison with infinity, pure absolute. You know, the higher self, it can't be reached. We can just embody certain aspects of it, degrees of it. So this is again a different conceptual framework. We can't just be mixing things up all the time. It depends on what we're looking at. The dualistic conceptual frameworks are similarly built, but their method of operation, their functionality, differs to some degree because we're not looking at the same things each time. There are different aspects of perception, conception, etc. about the universe, reality, and what is. You can look at the heart chakra as well, being green, as the center point, because we're trying to unite the lower energies and the higher energies together within us. So in a sense, that would be the chakra of the heart, which is green, to represent the quote balance and the unity aspect. So sometimes blue is better in terms of a higher frequency alignment with truth, higher frequency consciousness, but sometimes blue isn't the good one and red is better. For example, in the Matrix, you have the red pill and the blue pill. The red pill is the hard truth, the uncomfortable truth, and then the blue one is the comforting deception that puts you back to sleep. So you see, it always depends on what we're looking at, how we're representing things. It's not strictly, well, blue is always the highest and red is always the lowest, or, well, green always represents the best because it's in the middle in balance. These are failures to understand how dualistic conceptual frameworks work and improperly applying comparisons, which is why the dualistic conceptual framework, that's what I call it, and it's helped me to understand things. That's what I'm trying to get across to people, is it's a really useful tool for using comparison and identification and the similarities and differences between things, and I'll be going into that later when I read the articles that I've previously written. But right now I'm just giving a breakdown of how these images progress to develop an understanding in a three-dimensional aspect of how the frequencies of truth and perceptions tie into this framework, and you'll see how they link together perfectly. So the blind application of the colors and what's better and what's not just does not work. You cannot blindly apply correspondence. It just doesn't work. You have to know what you're talking about. Sometimes you balance the scale. Sometimes you tip the scale or balance, quote, balance, in one direction towards the truth, love, good, right, moral, etc. Because it's one way. It's not a balance between two things. The framework you construct for analysis determines whether certain things like balance are applicable, or whether it's just more BS, like let's balance the good and evil and engage in half good and half bad. Let's do half truth and half lies of, quote, balance. You have to be careful how you compare things. You can't just blindly apply correspondence of green being the most optimal thing and this balance concept being the most optimal thing in everything in life, because balance isn't the most optimal thing in life. The most optimal thing is the one way of truth, love, good, rightness, morality, natural law, true self, higher will, source, spirit, God, all, mind, all that. That's where we need to align. The balance thing is only usually aspects within ourselves. We're trying to balance the left and right brain, balance the masculine and feminine, balance our higher and lower natures. But that has to do with within us. But the thing we need to go towards is that singular thing, the thing that exists, the thing that is one way, the thing that is absolute in this dualistic conceptual framework when we're looking at truth and falsity and good and evil. We're trying to go in one direction. We're not trying to go in the middle, in the neutral ground, and do a little bit of both. That's just flawed thinking and bad logic, and so many people are stuck in this in the New Age because they don't understand how this works. So you have to be careful how you compare things. There's many New Age euphemisms implying the balance of good and bad along the lines, along the plane, and that there's no good or bad and other nonsense. You can maybe see how this ties into other things. This is how differences and similarities work in the dualistic conceptual framework I use for understanding and navigating the multiplicity, diversity, and variability of the many aspects of universe, reality, and what is. So I'll go back to that, my first image of the dualistic conceptual framework, which I called the continuum spectrum scalar degrees of good and bad. So when we look at it, when we conceive of it, you can put the two polar opposites. One is at one end, one is at the other. One is pure absolute or infinite good, the other one is pure absolute or infinite evil. Now, these things can't be reached because we can never become that pure good. We can't become God. We can't become fully the higher self and the higher will, and we can't become fully those higher natures and however they are existing in whatever energy form or whatever it is. You can't become that because we're here. We're here in this plane, in this reality. We can embody aspects of that by going towards it, by becoming it and living it, but you'll never become it in an absolute sense. It's too big for us. So that's why I represent it as polar opposites that are with arrows going into infinity, because who knows where the limits are, whether they're finite or not. That's not the point here. It's just a representation in our minds so that we can come to understand it. So I'll read the text in the image. Good and bad, polarized opposites, cannot be reached because they are infinite. Actions, experiences, conceptions, etc. never reach the polar opposite ends. The variability, multiplicity, and diversity of expression falls between the poles. Everything is relative, that is to say, has a relation to other things on the scale in varying degrees of similarity and difference in progression towards one end or the other. Therefore, comparison is a necessary tool. Good and bad are part of one thing. Everything is on one line of good. Bad or evil is the absence of good. It's a lack. So this is the plane, the scale of good, truth, love, which we can see later in the development of this concept, and I've put it into other diagrams, but in this one it's just good and bad. So you have things, the variability, multiplicity, and diversity are represented as dots of things that we can conceive of, actions we take, experiences, different things like that, events, and we can place them on the plane, on the line, and they're in various degrees of closeness and separateness, of similarity and difference. So that's just the basic framework I had conceived of. It gets more developed in the later diagrams, so I'll wait to explain it more there. So the next image is a development of the previous good and evil continuum spectrum, scale, degrees, grades. So now I've changed it. In my understanding, I've understood what it is, and I've just added more information. So I'll just describe the image and read some text and then give some follow-up explanations. So this is a continuum, spectrum, scale or degrees for perceiving, conceiving, understanding, and navigating reality. A framework for dualistic conceptualization. So what we have is we have a plane, again, a line. And this time I've started to merge the frequencies, the light spectrum frequencies, and we're going to see how this develops as we go along through each picture. Maybe you can already see it now. So the line is just like good before, it's what is, and then there's the absence of it, which is good and evil. So what you have is, it's a plane of X. X is whatever you want to use. So X is truth, right, good, love, light, hot, etc. You can keep going with comparisons. And then the opposite is false, wrong, bad, fear, dark, cold, and whatever else negative comparisons you want to use to the positive polarity. But the positive part is what is. The negative part is only an absence of that thing that is. So the plane of X contains variability, multiplicity, and diversity of reality. And the reality is things in the universe, its concepts, its actions, its events, it's a bunch of things. X is what is, in a sense. So I'll just read the image. Everything is not the same. So I have arrows pointing between the spaces. So I forgot to mention that on the good and bad one. Is that there's arrows pointing to the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of things. And then there's arrows pointing in between the space. And in between the space, that's how you come to know the similarities and differences between things, is you look at the properties and characteristics and attributes. So I'll just continue with the continuum spectrum, scalar degrees, the dualistic conceptual framework. The initial images just of more X, less of X. So everything is not the same. Various degrees of closeness and separateness, similarity and difference between properties or characteristics allow for us to discern, distinguish, correspond, correlate, compare, associate, identify, assess, analyze, judge, evaluate, etc. With tools to discern one thing from the other, we can make sense of reality, the similarities and differences between the various aspects of reality. Higher quality input and development of effective tools for processing will result in higher quality output. Now the tools are, the trivium, logic, analysis, imagination, creativity, all the things, all the capacities that we have as human beings, and all the things that we can come to understand and learn to use. These are all our tools, and whether we use them accurately or we don't use them accurately, that is completely in our hands, and that is our responsibility. And people who want to say that language is flawed and logic is flawed, and they use whatever excuses and justifications to try to invalidate the truth, that's because they don't understand things, they don't understand reality, and they don't have these tools developed. They don't have an understanding of language developed properly to be able to use it effectively. They don't have an understanding of logic properly to be able to use it effectively. So when they fail to use logic properly and someone calls them out on their irrational fallacies, well, they just come up with the excuse, oh, well, logic is flawed. Oh, well, logic is limited. Oh, well, language is flawed or language is limited when they fail to express themselves properly to convey the understanding they want people to understand. And they go in circles or they just make up excuses. And that's just because they're trying to use a tool, logic, a hammer, to screw in a screw. So they're hammering away at the screw and, oh my God, it's not going in, it's not going in. And then they want to say, oh, well, the hammer's flawed, logic is flawed, language is flawed, whatever tool we have, because of their failure to use it effectively, because of their failure to put in the time, energy, effort, determination, persistence in order to develop an understanding. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more it's going to become refined and the stronger it's going to be. So these are all capacities we have within us. So you want to blame logic, you want to blame language, well, you need to point the finger at yourself because you're trying to screw in a screw with a hammer, or you're trying to hammer in a nail with a screw gun. You know, these things aren't going to work. You can't use emotions to think your way to truth. That's not going to happen. There's certain tools. Emotions are meant for one thing. Thought is meant for one thing. In thought, you have logic and analysis, and you have creativity and intuition and imagination. And tools are supposed to be used for what they're intended to be used for. And people, when they fail to use them, well, they like to come up with excuses and justifications for a denial of the responsibility they have to learn to use the tools properly. So that's what I have to say about that. And the second part of this image is there's multiple levels of application for understanding, and then I list things that we can use this dualistic conceptual framework to help us understand. So what is right from wrong, moral from immoral, better from worse, etc. It's in a scale, spectrum, continuum, grade, degrees, etc. Can help us to understand. It has application to help us understand what is true and happening versus what is false and not happening. It can help us understand what is hot or light compared to what is cold or dark, the lack of hot or light. There's many other dualities that can be understood in a similar fashion. It can help us with what is in alignment with truth, right and good, versus what is not, because it's based in illusions, lies and deceptions, in order to manifest and exist. So this is the first part of the truth of what is in all its light and darkness, beauty and horror, positive and negative. You know, just because it exists doesn't mean it should. It's not really what's right, good, and true. And that's the second part of truth. That's what we should be aligning towards, is what is right, good, and true, in order to remove the manifestations of the illusions, lies, and deceptions, which brings us to collectively co-create our self-inflicted suffering. When we go towards the one way, in my diagram how I've made it, it's to the right, which is right. So going towards the right end of the spectrum is going towards what is right, good, and true, and loving, and morality, and all that. And you go away from that, well, you're going to less of that, and that's towards the illusions, lies, and deceptions, and what is false, wrong, bad, and all that is negative. So this helps us to understand the level of wisdom of right action that's being applied through natural law to manifest no harm, non-aggression, non-violence, non-murder, by not aligning, participating, supporting, or consenting to actions and behaviors which create harm, exploitation, enslavement, aggression, violence, or murder against other living, sentient, animate beings. The property of other living beings is not yours to take, period. So the truth is absolute, it's extreme, it's one way, it's in one direction. It's not mix and match, mix everything together, put a gray color, let's put some neutral, let's mix the good and the bad and neutral, let's mix the lies and the truth, and come to some false balance, neutral ground. No. That's not what it's about. So about the infinite aspect in the polarized nature, the infinite, pure, absolute nature. Many people want to use that polarized conception, the polarity expression, as if it were a reality in our reality, as if it's even possible to attain an absolutist nature of ourselves or whatever. And then they want to use that conception to invalidate the possibility of reaching that thing that is on the plane that the line is constructed of, whether we're looking at truth, right, good, love, etc. Because they think it can only be absolute, therefore it's unattainable. They use this type of thinking as a type of validation for not seeking the properties, characteristics, attributes, aspects, or qualities of that absolute thing. They think that, well, since it's absolute, we can't know the absolute, so therefore we can't know about it, which is false. You can know certain things about it. You just can't know every single thing about it. We're not God, so we can't know everything about it. That's what I was talking about before. And this works into solipsism and the New Age deception of truth not being knowable. Because we can't know the absolute truth. You can't know the absolute truth, so don't bother looking. You're never going to know it. You can't reach it, so don't bother. This also ties into solipsism and the New Age deception again, in terms of perfection not being possible. So because they view the absolute not being attainable, and that's perfection isn't attainable, which is true. No one can be perfect. Perfect is only a conception. You can't actually reach it. But they use that again as an excuse to validate their conception that don't even try to perfect yourself. Don't even try to change yourself, better yourself, improve yourself, because perfection is unattainable. Therefore, you're just wasting your time, or there's some such nonsense. Inversely, there's also another poison of this type of thinking, and it's the reverse, because people will think, well, don't try to perfect yourself, don't try to improve, don't try to change, don't try to heal, don't try to better yourself, because you're already perfect. You're perfect the way you are. Everything is just the way it's supposed to be. You're exactly where you are, where you're supposed to be. So feel good about yourself. Everything's perfect. You're perfect. There's no need to change anything about your actions that create negative consequences. You can just ignore what you're a part of and just think of yourself as perfect in whatever you do. No need to change. So yeah, let's just keep going in the same direction without any possibility of change, because we're so in denial and ignorant of the truth and facing ourselves that we don't want to come to an admission and honesty and self-respect that there are many, many aspects of ourselves that need to change in alignment with what is right, good, and true, and love, and moral, natural law, higher self, higher will, etc. We need to embody those things bit by bit, certain aspects, qualities, characteristics, properties, attributes that we come to recognize. And there's also the opposite of, well, from what I was talking about, there's the absolute truth, but it's not reachable. So there's the solipsism and the New Age bullshit that way. But then they go for the other end of the spectrum, and there's no absolute truth. So now they want to validate that there's no truth, and the same rationality applies as the other one. It's the same type of thinking, it's just too polarized, lack of understanding conceptions where, oh, well, it's absolute truth, so you can't reach it. And then the other one is there is no absolute truth, so there is no truth. And either way, it involves a validation of not seeking truth. And this ideology leads to my version of the truth, or your truth is as valid as my truth. And this is the believe whatever you want bullshit. I hear people still talking about this who talk about many truthful things. There was a video about beliefs or something, and I scanned through it. But at one point, the guy was saying, "Oh, this is my version of truth," and that's just, oh, it's in the same line of thinking of your truth is just as valid as my truth, which is bullshit. It's believing whatever you want. It's not my versions of the truth. The versions are the mistruths. Truth is singular. People need to understand this. So in the framework, truth, love, good, right, etc. is one way. It's to the right side, as I've drawn it. It makes sense to me that way. In the higher frequencies, towards the blue. And the other way is towards the red, the lower frequencies, because we're using the visible light spectrum here as a comparison. We're using that understanding of the light spectrum of low is red and high is blue, and we're applying it here in a dualistic conceptual framework for understanding truth, love, right, good, morality, etc. So there's the variability, multiplicity, and diversity of what is in universe that falls along the line or plane of the spectrum of truth, love, good, right, etc. These are the actions we take, the concepts we think of, the objects in the universe. It depends on what we're trying to understand with the particular framework we're designing. For example, we take actions. One action, such as murder, theft of life, is more towards the left, towards the negative, compared to another action, such as theft of a shoelace, or a shoe, or a sock, or whatever one. I'm just trying to trivialize it as an example. They're both wrong, but there's degrees of wrongness. There's degrees of what's more wrong than something else. And that's why I talk about this as degrees of relativity. And that's no way validating moral relativism. If someone does, they don't understand what I'm talking about. Everything is in varying relative degrees of similarity or difference. Hence, comparison is a necessary tool. Now, if we add another action, the theft of sexual choice, however you want to term it, via rape, sexual assault, then that one is comparatively worse than the theft of a sock, but it's not worse than murder. It depends what you're comparing. So that's where we get back to these dots on the plane. You view them as dots, and that's the variability. And then the space between those dots, the space between the things you're comparing, well, that's where you come into the separateness and the closeness, the distinction and the similarity of those characteristics, those properties, those aspects, those attributes. And then you compare them to see where it falls in the line. It's a grade, it's a degree, it's a spectrum, it's a continuum. The relative position from one thing to the other is expressed through a comparison of the attributes, characteristics, and properties of each respective thing. The more in common, the closer they are usually. The more they differ and diverge in properties, characteristics, attributes, qualities, etc., the more different they are. So this is applicable to actions, events, objects, concepts, other things. It depends what we want to look at. You can't just put them all on a scale and try to fit everything in there. A baseball has characteristics of a tennis ball, and some things that differ, such as the color, the constituent elemental components, what they're made of, and there's many other things that they differ in. And there's similarities as well. They're being compared as objects. So you can't just stick in morality or an action like a murder and compare a baseball to a murder. Your dualistic conceptual framework has to be constructed properly, and you have to understand how it works in order to make a valid comparison. You can't just make invalid comparisons, invalid blind correspondences. It just does not work. You'll screw up your understanding of reality, of what is, of truth that way. It will result in a flawed understanding of reality, and therefore your actions in life will be limited, because you've limited your access of understanding the truth. So in no way does this give credence, merit, or validation to the fallacy of moral relativism, that is to say, there is no good or bad. Attempts to negate the good and bad spectrum can arise from falsely attributing the concept of good and bad with absolutes, extremes, and polarized myopic perceptions, from invalidating dualistic conceptual frameworks, or from negating thoughts or emotions, or from negating the ability to relate, compare, discern, distinguish, differentiate, evaluate, and judge. The level of perceptions aligning with truth and the level of consciousness we have as a result of an increase in conscious awareness of reality, universe, what is, the truth. The more consciously aware we become of things, the more our consciousness will evolve, and the expansive force of consciousness, love, truth, all that is good will increase, and we'll embody that more within us. And yeah, so I'll go on with the explanations of the next image. We'll get more into it. So the next image is the degrees of frequency of perceptions merging with the dualistic conceptual framework that I designed, and you can start to see it more visually here, how they relate to each other. As you progress through each image, you'll see how I've added different components and how they actually are the same thing and they're relating to each other. It helps in our understanding of reality. So this image, same title as the other one, slightly different. Continuum, spectrum, scalar degrees in the frequency of truth, love, good, etc. A dualistic conceptual framework for perceiving, conceiving, understanding, and navigating reality. So it's the frequency of perceptions aligning with truth, the frequency of consciousness from greater embodiment of truth. So here I have an arrow pointing to one of the little yellow circles in the frequencies, and it's the contact, alignment, embodiment of an aspect of truth. And you go back to where the frequency wave contacts that plane, that's where it contacts it. Now, right now you might not understand the plane. If you go to the next image, you'll understand how this works. We're going to go back to the previous one too, but in the next image it's the frequency degrees represented as the plane. I'll explain it more after, but I'll just keep reading the previous image for now. The one with the squiggly lines and the dots and the frequency lines, the intersection points as the yellow circles, and all the text around to explain it. So I'm going to read the text and then we'll go on to the next image with the plane there, just to get an overall understanding. So the circles are a contact, alignment, embodiment of an aspect of truth. Limited perception of reality is limited access to truth, is limited unity and embodiment of truth, and that's limited consciousness. That's because you're more towards, not going towards more truth, more love, more good. You're going towards less truth, less love, less good. So because you're over there, your perceptions are not aligning with reality as much, your perceptions are not aligning with truth as much, therefore the frequency vibratory rate of consciousness that you have will be limited because the data set available, the conscious awareness of reality, of the truth, is limited. So your consciousness is limited directly because it's proportional to your conscious awareness. And we go to the right side, a higher frequency of contact or alignment of perceptions with quality truth, what is, and a care, a true care, to embody and become those values. The values are what is right, good, true, moral, etc. That results in greater embodiment of truth and a higher frequency of consciousness. And then the bottom part is just a repeat from the previous image that didn't have the frequency oscillations onto the dualistic conceptual framework. So we go to the next image and we see the same thing. I took away the text and I just added just the plane of truth, that line, but we're looking at it 90 degrees from above, from the top view. And we're just going to come back to this shortly. We'll go on to the next image, which will help us to explain everything. So the next image is a vertical plane perspective, which is similar to the previous one. It's just this one's a bit slightly tilted, so it's not directly above. It's slightly towards the side. And you can see how it works out. This is just a visual representation to help you understand how things transition in each picture and where we're getting at the final image that I created in a 3D perspective. So you see your frequency of perceptions in consciousness, they become the color of whatever truth you're most frequently in contact with or less frequently in contact with. If you're in contact with more lies and more deception and less truth and less love and more fear and more falsity and more evil and less good, well, then you're going to be in the red. You're going to be in the lower vibratory state of consciousness, not being able to engage in as much right action because you don't have that conscious awareness. And then the opposite for blue. So I think it's pretty explanatory. I've already talked about those before. So when you take this, before we progress, if we go back to the truth and frequency of perceptions image that I titled, which is a remake of Mark Passio's frequencies aligning with truth, you can see that this is a cross-section of a plane. So you're only seeing the plane as flat. It's only a line on the horizontal axis, and it's from the front view. If you go to the one we were just looking at with the blues, we're looking at it from a side view but elevated. We're looking at it from the side so we see the different qualities and attributes of truth from the low to the high. But if you were to look at it from that right side, from the front, well, that's what you're going to see is just a line. If you're not looking at it from an elevated vantage point, you're just looking at it from the horizontal cross section, you're just going to see that plane, the absolute side, the blue-violet highest concentration of truth. That's what you're going to look at from that side. It's a single plane of truth. Now when I showed the first continuum spectrum scalar degrees of the Dualistic Conceptual Framework with X, the plane of X, and more of X or less of X, here you can see that it's a 90-degree turn from the previous image. It's still a cross-section from the horizontal view, but we turned it 90 degrees. We actually turned it 90 degrees counterclockwise. So instead of viewing the absolute side, we turned it 90 degrees counterclockwise, and now we're seeing, instead of the absolute truth, the highest frequency in front of us, now we're seeing it to the side. I hope this is becoming understandable. We're seeing it as a range of alignment with more truth, love, good, right, or less of X towards more falsity, fear, evil, wrong, etc. Now the next image, which, as I explained, was a combination of the frequencies of truth and perception and consciousness merged with the Dualistic Conceptual Framework. And here you get to understand that it's a 90-degree upward. We moved the plane 90 degrees downward. So either we moved upward to look at it from up, or we moved the plane, we pushed the plane down from the front, pushed it down, and now we're looking at it from above. So if you go to the next image with the plane, you can see how this represents. You can understand how before, when it was just a plane of X, more of X, less of X, we were just looking at it as a horizontal cross section. But now we've tilted it 90 degrees, and now we're looking at it face down. And now, because we're doing that, we can see the oscillations. I didn't draw them in the other one because it would have just been a bunch of circles, spirals, and wouldn't have made much sense. But here you can see them as the frequency. When we tilt it 90 degrees downward, or we go 90 degrees up and we look at it from above, now we can see the oscillations, and you'll see this understanding when I do the 3D model of the plane. So I'm just doing this to explain the progression. So after I explain everything, you can go back and look at all the images yourself and see how one concept progresses into the other to develop a greater understanding of this in a visual way in our minds, in a three-dimensional way. So the next image, which we saw before, which was a quick demonstration, it's the same as the previous one, 90 degrees, but it's like 70, 65 degrees or something. We just tilted it a bit just to give you an understanding visually of where we're going next. So the next image is my detailed recreation of Mark Passio's conception of truth versus perceptions. Again, I called it the same as my white background, simple one, truth and frequency of perceptions. So I'll just read what's on it. A higher frequency or contact or alignment of perception with quality truth, what is, and a care, true care, to embody and become those values, what is right, good, true, moral, etc., results in greater embodiment of truth and a higher frequency of consciousness. And then we go to the red one, and it's got arrows pointing to the contact points. So those contact points, as compared to the higher frequency, it's a limited perception of reality, and that's a limited access to truth, which is a limited unity and embodiment, becoming and living of the truth, which is a limitation in consciousness. The next image is just taking those three individual frequencies and just merging them onto one plane, which is what I've done previously in the Dualistic Conceptual Framework when I showed the top-down view with the frequencies over the plane. You know, there were multiple frequencies. Well, this is the same thing, but we're looking at it as a cross-section. So instead of a cross-section of just one frequency, now we're seeing the three of them together on that horizontal plane, where we see the line or plane of truth just as the absolute nature, because we're looking at it from the side of the highest frequency, from the ultraviolet side. Now the next image is where we're going to tilt that, just like we've previously been tilting it. So we tilt it, go to the next image, and now you see it tilted. Now we've gone up 20 degrees, 30 degrees, 45, whatever it is. So now we can see how this all ties in together with the previous images, which is what I've been trying to get people to understand, to see this in their minds in this 3D way. So you have truth, love, good, etc., everything that's in the higher frequency. And then you have your oscillation, your frequency oscillation. So frequencies are represented in a two-dimensional way, but if you look at frequencies in a three-dimensional way, they're actually a spiral. So that's what I'm depicting here, is the spiral nature of frequencies. And when we actually look at the plane of truth, that line, in a three-dimensional way rather than as a two-dimensional cross-section, we're seeing it in this three-dimensional way, and you can see the intersection points as the blue higher frequency of perception and higher frequency consciousness comes in contact with that higher quality and higher degree of truth. It has more contact, so it can become more of the truth. It can recognize more of the truth first, and then it can become more of the truth. And when you become more of the truth, well, then your frequency increases, and then you become that blueness. Since you're contacting with the blue higher frequencies, the violet higher frequencies, you're going to become those higher frequencies. But you got to choose to become it. You have to actually embody it by changing yourself and being it. Being those certain qualities, those certain aspects, characteristics, attributes, properties that you've come to recognize as what is truth, love, good, moral, right, etc. And you're actually aligning with them. And then you go back to the green one. There's less and less alignment. The waveform, the wavelength is longer. It's not as quick as the blue one. It's not as rapid. There's not as much contact. And then you go back to the red, and that's really low. That's a lot lower. There's a lot less frequency. It's a shorter wavelength. Is it longer? I forget if it's shorter or longer. I'd have to check the terms and definitions for that. So yeah, the explanations, the text I have is the same as the previous one and the one before that. So when we shift our perspective from the 2D cross-section and you tilt above, now you can see how the frequencies of perception and alignment with truth and the frequencies of consciousness, how they are actually represented in this limited framework. We're using the light spectrum, but you can see how they relate to that and how it relates to the dualistic conceptual framework, because each of those contact points is one of the yellow dots where we come to see or recognize or perceive an aspect of the variability, multiplicity, and diversity that is in the universe, reality, and what is. And then we recognize it, and then so that's the first part of truth. And then the second part of truth is recognizing those things that are better for us, that is actually true, right, good, love, moral, natural law. And it's in alignment with the higher will and the higher self and spirit and all that that's good. That is the pure goodness and the absolute and the infinite and all that we can't become, but we can embody certain aspects of it. So I hope this makes more sense, a little bit, at least, in how the truth and the perceptual frequencies and consciousness relates to a dualistic conceptual framework for understanding reality. Now I'm going to go more into the dualistic conceptual framework for understanding reality by reading the 2 articles that I previously wrote, which will give you more of an understanding of this framework in more detail to see how it relates to helping us navigate reality. So this part should be relatively quick, I guess. They're going to be just reading an article, and they're not very long. They're not like the Truth is Love ones, so don't worry. Not much more to go. So the first article is Degrees of Relativity and the Chains of Learned Helplessness. This was the first one I wrote to try to describe this understanding to people so that they could understand it as well. This is a contemplation about universe, multiplicity, diversity, variability, similarity, separation, difference, distinction, relative, relationship, correspondence, comparison, with respect to acquiring an understanding of reality, universe, what is, truth, with discernment, evaluation, assessment, judgment, identification, association, etc. This is pretty much to explain how various tools we have work to our advantage and should not be viewed as a negative when engaged in correctly, especially to the New Age adherents. Conceptions of don't judge, don't compare, you're dividing things, you just want to look superior, you want to be better than other people, and all these other bullshit excuses. Because noticing the negative and pointing out how it's different from what they want or wish things to be is not something they like to hear. Truth unites and lies divide. Sometimes the truth is blinding when we are so entrenched in darkness. At the end, I have an etymological breakdown to help develop an understanding of how these words, terms, and concepts are linked if you don't understand my prior explanation in the article. Everything is relative around us. I am relative to you, I am relative to the environment, etc. We are in relative degrees of identification, similarity, difference, sameness, etc. with various things in the universe. This is a result of the variability, multiplicity, and diversity in the universe. Everything is relative, and so comparison is a necessary tool to determine the degrees to which things are similar or dissimilar, same or different, joined or separate, the degree to which we are identifying with things, the degree to which we are in harmony or disharmony with things, the degree to which we are like or unlike other things. Usually, the more we are like something in universe, the more we identify with it, and conversely, the less we are like something in universe, the less we identify with it. Likeness is determined by commonality, similarity, sameness, etc. Or through apophysis, in the negative, by distinction, differentiation, dissimilarity, etc. We also tend to care more about those things in the universe we identify with and care less about those things we identify less with. We can apply comparison in many ways to help determine things. It is a basis for the law of identity. For example, an apple is an apple will never be an orange. A is A, B is B, A is not B. We can compare the human animal to other animals, compare the human animal, other animals, and plants, and compare all the previous with the base materials and elements and the earth. We can even compare things and realize that they have far more in common than they do not in common, and are so similar that they can essentially be associated with each other within relative degrees, yet are not purely identical. That's where the degrees comes in. The degrees of similarity and difference between the properties, characteristics, components, qualities, attributes, etc. Comparison is a tool to be used, effectively or ineffectively, and the efficiency of its use lies not in the tool itself, but in the beholder who operates it. If you fear using comparison or view it in a negative way, that is your choice, your own choice, to view the tool this way, and it will only limit your own capabilities in using as many tools that are at our availability in an accurate way to gain greater understanding of ourselves and that which is outside of us. I would like to clear something up before continuing. The fact that everything has a degree of relativity to everything else by comparison does not mean moral relativism. Thinking that whatever actions others or yourself commit can be justified or dismissed in solipsistic validation is incorrect. Moral relativism is a fallacy and a convenient brainwashing or mind control, i.e. mindfuck, pardon my swearing, to make people accept or feel good, quote, feel good about what they have done or what is going on around them, and engenders a sense of learned helplessness, a type of self-victimization. Learned helplessness can be exemplified by the following experiment. An animal is put into a spot, free to move, and then they're given an electric shock to that location, thereby shocking the animal, and it would flee from the pain. It wouldn't remain in the same position. It would move. You know, that's what animals have in common. We're animate. You can move. A plant, you can shock it. Well, is it going to go running away? No. So stop comparing things idiotically that animals are plants or plants are animals and all these irrational fallacies. I'm just sick of that bullshit. So as you repeat this same experiment, the same thing occurs. Pain in the animal induces a response to physical motion to get away from the source of the pain. Then an animal is tied and shocked. The animal tries to move from the location but can't. Eventually, after enough shocks, the animal just sits there and takes it. It doesn't try to move. It even stops yelling because it realizes there's no point. There's just no point. No point. It becomes habitually conditioned to recognize that it could not affect any change against what was being done to it. That is to say, run away from the pain in this case, as the first example was done. The animal will run away from the pain. No more pain. So this is when learned helplessness has emerged. Next, what they do is they untie or unrestrict the animal from freeing itself from the pain, and then they shock it. But even though it's free, it doesn't move. It's shocked again and again and again, just like when it was tied down, but it still doesn't move. The animal has learned, that is to say, has been conditioned, brainwashed, mind-controlled into a state of helplessness. It's as if the animal has constructed a belief, a worldview about its reality and its position in that reality that it cannot seem to break from. They may or may not even be aware that they are no longer chained, but they are putting their own chains on themselves by being unable to break from a conditioned state whereby you see a current condition that you are in as permanent, unchanging, unchangeable, no matter what you do. Many people are in this worldview, this poisoned conditioned mindset, and cannot see past its folly. They accept the wrongs being done around them and even justify them with solipsism or moral relativism, which has been inculcated through the change in behaviors of society to continually accept the assault of wrongdoings from leaders and so-called elites and everyone in our lives that is allowed to control society. Over and over we get screwed, but we keep on taking it because we don't want to face the reality of our current condition, the current state, the current situation we are in, both in the world and society and in ourselves. We just don't want to face the world and the reality and its light and dark, beauty, horror, positive, negative, and we don't want to face those in ourselves either, because that would mean we would actually have to be honest with ourselves and admit to the wrongs and the evil, and then we'd have to actually develop the courage and the willpower, take the time, energy, effort, persistence, determination to actually change, better, heal, purify, sublimate, transmute, and become better versions of ourselves that we recognize are in alignment with what is right, good, true, love, moral, natural law, higher will, higher self, source, all God, etc. Call it whatever you want. Learned helplessness is also when you stop being objective and looking at reality honestly and begin to tacitly accept the wrong that you do or others do, or maybe even justify these wrongs as the way things are. It is the thinking that this is the way things are and you can't change them, that people don't change, that what is wrong will continue because I don't want to look at it. I'm a helpless victim to the current circumstances beyond my control. No point in judging it either, because that would cause me to create negative feelings inside, and that will cause disease in my body. So I better not judge, I better not discern, I better not analyze, I better not evaluate, I better not assess, I better not identify, associate, I better not understand my reality. No, that'll just cause me pain and I'll develop disease. So I just gotta ignore shit. I can even begin to justify the wrongdoings. Otherwise, I would have to admit they are indeed wrong and are actually occurring to me. Now that I can't bear with. I prefer to be comfortable, feel good about myself and my place in life, that things are perfect, things are exactly the way they're supposed to be, I'm exactly where I need to be, there's no need for anything, and just accept it the way it is, and there you go. Things will come when they come, and there's nothing I can do to change that, and they'll just happen when they happen, and I just gotta go with the flow. So we have been conditioned to accept a wrongdoing being committed against us, others, or by us, and may justify it as right, and are not facing the reality, the truth, what is actually the current condition. We have been screwed over and conditioned to take it and repeat this cycle without knowing it. It will continue so long as we don't realize the chains are put on by ourselves. The conditioning is imposed by others, but sustained and maintained by us. That's why they're self-imposed chains. Just like on the tarot card with Baphomet, or whatever his name is in the background. And the naked guy and girl, they got the chains that are so loose, but that's because they're keeping them on themselves. To sell something, someone has to buy it. They sell us bullshit and screw us over continuously, but we are the ones who first bought and continue to buy it, even after we see the results over and over and over. We keep the chains on. We keep thinking it's pointless to try to change it. We fail to face reality and look at it honestly and see the cause and effect relationship that occurs as a result of our and others' actions, behaviors, and habits. We are co-creating this bullshit by tacitly accepting it and even attempting, making, inventing, creating rights from wrongs. That's what a justification is. when such a foolish thing cannot be done. These are the false justifications and excuses, and that is what keeps it going. We are the ones that chain ourselves. We are the ones who can free ourselves. Not someone from the sky as either God, Jesus, or aliens, or anything else. Our fate is up to us. It's all in our hands. Now we come back to comparison and the relative degrees of similarity things have from one another. We can easily see that a chair is not a table, but they both have legs and may be made of the same material, like wood, but they are also different, and they are similar, but similar and different in varying degrees. Similarly, this applies to all facets in the physical, non-corporeal, and conceptual realms. When we look at certain rights and wrong actions, such as which streets to take to get to a certain destination, everything that we do can be applied to a relative degree of similarity or dissimilarity from one another. Some things are more right, some things are more wrong. In morality, something is either good right or bad wrong, and we can apply a comparison further to see what is worse or better. So there is good and right, there is bad and wrong, but when we look at different things, we can determine which one is better, which one is worse, by looking at those varying degrees of similarity and difference of the characteristics, properties, qualities, components, attributes, and aspects. For example, stealing property versus stealing a life. They are both wrong, bad, and false ways of living, and one is worse than the other. One is more towards the end of evil in the scale than the other. This is how actions of right and wrong, good and bad, are relative to each other. There is objective morality, and we can better determine an accurate conception of it if we choose to use the tools at our disposal. And that means actually using them to learn how to then better use them and integrate, correspond, correlate, and find more interlocking patterns from the use of all the tools we choose to use to determine our reality within and without. And that's the tools of logic, comparison, correspondence, relation, imagination, intuition, everything we have. We got to use them. They're there. Use them, use them, use them. Develop them. Use them properly. We can break down one morally wrong action we recognize and see how a constituent causal factor is identical or related to another action we previously did not recognize as a wrong because we failed to identify the components of grammar to that thing. We may have identified who, what, where, when, but failed to properly look at how and why to see the root causal factors. After a breakdown and analysis, and with correspondence, integration, relation, comparison, etc., all the other tools we can use, we can see how it is actually a wrong action. This is thanks to the tools we use, the comparisons and the correlations and the correspondence. We can see how things relate, and we can understand more of reality. This is how our conscious awareness grows. That's how our consciousness evolves. If one attempts to dismiss, deflect, or disqualify the dualistic conceptual frameworks are valid tools as well, by negatively associating all dualities as invalid, as I would imagine an adherent of the New Age ideology would suggest, then you are dogmatically refusing to engage in a tool at your availability, that of comparison, correspondence, etc. The dualistic framework envisioned is only valid if it is valid, based in truth. A person may envision a comparison between two things that is absurd and irrelevant. We can compare a property or characteristic such as the size of a car and an apple. We can compare a property or characteristic something does not have, like the speed of a car and a house. Comparison at its most basic level is done between two things. A comparison of more and more things leads to greater integration, correlation, correspondence, and pattern recognition, interlinking everything into an ever more cohesive web. This is where the big picture, holistic understanding comes in. The more you interlink, the more you connect, the more patterns you're going to see, and the more your consciousness is going to evolve. Also, to attempt to dismiss all dualities as false because you conceive that the only relevant consideration is that of non-duality, and everything is a singularity, monad, or unity at the, quote, core of reality, and anything that divides and separates is bad and should not be done, and therefore conclude every other conception that is not singular or one or joined or united is false and correct, well, this thinking is folly. This thinking is fallacious thinking. We are not at the, quote, core, unified, all-encompassing source of realm or dimension of reality. We exist in different realms that permeate reality. There's physical realm, conceptual realm, emotional realm, spiritual realm, etc. The attempt to invalidate dualistic frameworks because they are simply dual is a conditioned thought process that prevents one from being able to look at reality honestly and see the similarities and differences that exist amongst all facets of creation. That is how there is variability, diversity, and multiplicity in the first place. It is a recognition of what is reality, the truth. And that's how people come into the bullshit of, oh, the plants feel, and the plants this, and the plants that. Okay, sure. But when you look at human animals and you look at other animals, there is 1,000 things that are more in common because we are actually animate animals than when you look at other animals and the plants. And then you want to, the plants feel, so then you're killing plants and all this other bullshit, and it's just irrational people. When we view discernment, assessment, evaluation, correspondence, relation, comparison, etc., in a negative way and refrain from using these tools to our advantage, we limit our ability to determine what things are, to define and understand one thing from the next. We are then less aware of the different aspects of reality, universe, what is, how they interconnect, and where we relate amongst them. I'll just add back on these two people I was talking about. If anyone views that as divisive, and anyway, go read my Truth is Love article, because you don't even understand what being divisive is. Aligning with lies and bullshit, that's what is divisive and divisive, however you want to say it. When you're united with truth and you understand it and those people aren't, and they reject it in violent ways, and they make fun of people who are actually aligned with truth and who do care about other life and who are trying to save lives and trying to not do harm, it's just ridiculous to hear their bullshit excuses and justifications. And anyone who claims that that's divisive by calling the bullshit out, well, you don't understand anything about what true unity is. Now read my Truth is Love article and you'll get it. Because truth is love, love is truth, truth unites, lies divide, embrace truth, care for truth. Now that's the key. Back to the article. There's an image quote. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's from Carl Jung. Then I have the Phoenix quote. Sometimes you just have to die a little inside in order to be reborn and rise again as a stronger and wiser version of you. So we have a choice. We can change things, but it starts with ourselves before it can effectively happen on the outside. We can choose to face reality, within and without, in all its beauty and horror, in all its light and darkness, good and bad, having the courage and strength to face the negative, dark, shadow, demon, within and without, and realizing, with real eyes, realize the real lies, with true honesty and self-respect, our current condition, not fighting against it in denial or resistance, but being honest to see things as they are, seeing what is. Then we can choose to change, heal, sublimate, transmute, or purify that darkness we no longer desire to embody, and no longer let it be an influencing factor in our lives. The act of the phoenix was to burn from its ashes, is reborn anew. The fire is about purifying in an alchemical view, and from that purification we are reborn anew. The phoenix can do this many times, as we can continually look at ourselves in honesty and purify ourselves and heal from those conditioned and programmed patterns of thought, actions, reaction, habits, and behavior. It is a process of dissolution, deconstruction, and disintegration to no longer be attached to those things we recognize and realize never assisted us in our positive evolution in consciousness, but in fact kept us locked in the grave, unbegun, uninitiated, unawakened. It's about letting go of the attachment to false beliefs and illusions used as a basis for our sense of identity and self. Those attachments to deceptions and lies prevent us from understanding the truth, and they keep us from caring about the truth, what is going on, and even caring about ourselves. Our habits, behaviors, and actions are in our hands, and we can better ourselves through the change if we have the courage, strength, honesty, and self-respect to face ourselves in the mirror and see how what we do, our actions, behaviors, and habits, and what others do affects us and the reality around. We have great power to alter our world, and we can obviously see through the current reality where we are manifesting by our actions and behaviors. We have great power to cause an effect and manifest. We have great power to cause an effect and manifest vast changes in the world. Positive and negative capabilities are in our hands. It is our choice what we do. Morally wrong action doesn't exist if we don't do morally wrong things. We choose to do wrong. There would be no wrong behavior if we chose not to do wrong. With great power comes great responsibility. Being consciously aware of ourselves internally and the resulting world we co-create through our thoughts and emotions, either unifying in harmony together or being in conflicting internal opposition, the force of Satan, with each other, to produce the actions, behaviors, and habits that manifest the reality we choose to live in. Being consciously aware of more and more is what creates greater interlinking and pattern recognition, integration, correlation, and correspondence to enhance and provide greater degrees of accuracy in understanding reality within and without. The more aware we become, the less conditioning we have. We break off chips and blocks of indoctrination, conditioning, mind control, brainwashing that are inculcated from an early age and become more aware of what actually is as opposed to the illusion of society and reality that has been fed to us. The more we become consciously aware, the more we break away from our false identity attachment to illusions, and the more we can choose to act in different ways than we have previously been conditioned to act. This is how we can heal ourselves in the world. Healing, bettering, improving, changing, and breaking free from our self-imposed chains is all related. They are all positive evolution. The world is far from perfect, and we are all far from perfect. The society that is manifest is a direct result of how we think, feel, and do. We need to do inner work before we can accurately and effectively create and manifest the reality or society we want to live in. To get a certain degree of freedom without, we must master ourselves to a certain degree within. We are all in this together. One spaceship Earth, spinning in a vortex through space. Let's start doing a better job with ourselves. We need to use the tools we have to see, realize real lies. Evolve consciousness, care, compassion, empathy. Truth is love, love is truth, truth unites, lies divide. And there's a quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti. We have created this society, not each one of us, but our past generations. Those and us have created this present immoral, destructive society. And we are trapped by that society. That society is made by each one of us. So we are responsible for that society. Whether it is possible not to change society, but it is possible to radically, deeply transform our conditioning, which is understanding deeply our consciousness, which is what we are. It is possible to transform not into something, but to change, to bring about a mutation in the very structure and nature of our consciousness. That is the problem. That is the crisis. It is not a political crisis, economic crisis, or the crisis of war, but the crisis in ourselves. And we apparently cannot face that crisis, or are unwilling to face it. And so we try to escape from that fact through various forms of entertainment, religious, political, football, and all the rest of it. And that's Jiddu Krishnamurti on conflict. After that I have etymological breakdown, a bunch of words, you can see their definitions and how it all relates together. I'll just read the last explanation I have. The intellect discerns. This is part of life. Good luck lying to yourself if you think you don't discern anything, as if you see everything as the same thing. An apple wouldn't be different from an orange or a banana. No words would be different. No thought would be different. Life would not exist if there was no diversity, variability, and multiplicity, which is only possible through discernment, differentiation, etc. If you need more help to understand, look into the law of identity to understand how A is A is not B. A and B are both letters. So they're similar in that way, but they're not the same. Judgment, evaluation, assessment, discernment, differentiation, and comparison are all part of our ability to live in this existence as individuals. Shun the tools at your own detriment. Be willfully ignorant to not understand reality. Further identification of something apart from our own identity can also be done through an association, and an association is originally meaning things coming together, joining with, uniting with, based on similarity. Two things associate because of what they have in common. Relating, corresponding, comparing not only looks at similarities to make identification and associations, but also the differences to see distinction from one thing to another, so that we can identify how much one thing relates with another thing in degrees of similarity or difference. And yes, there is a difference between animals and plants. Wake up, you delusional idiots who try to validate exploitation, enslavement, harm, violence, or murder of innocent, sentient, animate beings by trying to equate them with plants in sentience or consciousness. Get real, get grounded, stop making bullshit excuses. So the other article, I'll only read the last few paragraphs. The other images have their own paragraphs, but they're all interlinked, and so I'll just read the last ones. This is the article, Conceptual Framework for Understanding Reality, Truth, Love, and Good, which I wrote to further explain the degrees of relativity and the chains of learned helplessness, in case people didn't understand it well enough. So, the points on the scale are the degree of accuracy, correctness, rightness in perceiving truth, love, or good from falsity, fear, or bad. The more we understand about reality, the more our perceptions, conceptions, and understanding are in alignment, harmony, unison, non-conflict, non-opposition, non-duality, congruent, consistent, integrated, becoming and embodying various aspects of truth, love, good, and our overall consciousness, our overall being, moves up on the scale towards higher frequency because we have become those values and principles of truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law through our expressions of consciousness themselves. Not because we wish, want, or intend them to be, but because we have actually become them through our way of being and living in life. Non-duality, etc., is authentic living through the integrity of our expressions of consciousness, thoughts, emotions, and actions, being united and working as one, in common purpose and harmony with the truth, love, good, right, morality, natural law, higher self, higher will, spirit, source, all, etc. Truth, love, and good is what is. The line on the scale is what is in universe reality, and also what is right, good, and true. That's, as I've previously explained, the two types of truth we can look at, just to make a clear distinction between them. Falsity, fear, and badness is the absence or lack of truth, love, or good. We create the lies, deceptions, illusions, falsity, bad, wrong, and immorality of our collective, co-created reality through refusal, ignorance, avoidance, or denial of the truth. Knowledge is having acquired a particular aspect of truth. Ignorance is an absence of having acquired and grasped a truth. Ignorance is sourced in fear because it is a fear. Lack of care and refusal of taking on the responsibility of the great work. This is a rejection and fear of truth because truth isn't a freebie. Truth requires us to pay attention and spend time. There is great responsibility in truth. The first responsibility is to care for truth, to seek, discover, and accept the truth that is available and being permeated. The second responsibility is to then become and embody the truth, love, good, right, morality, etc., as part of our being and existence in order to manifest in right action wisdom. The third responsibility is to share and speak the truth to others to improve the quality of our collective co-created shared reality. The great work is indeed great and feared by many. Anything but that hard work. Discovering, learning, becoming, and embodying truth requires time, effort, energy, dedication, and persistence. Wisdom is right action as a result of the alignment, harmony, unison, integration, coherence with truth, love, good, natural law, higher self, higher will, etc. Apathy and laziness to seek and discover truth will gradually degenerate into more falsity, fear, bad, wrong, lies, deceptions, illusions for our collective, shared, co-created reality, bringing us more self-inflicted suffering. So this article has pictures and it has text in the pictures that you can keep with the pictures, and I've also pasted the text outside of the pictures so you can read just the text. I'll read the last three paragraphs that I conclude with. In these conceptualized dualistic frameworks, there is only one thing. The other component is illusory. It is not really there. But we perceive it as being there so that we have a scale of comparison to reference and relate against in order for us to come to know the real essence of that thing which does exist. This is also how good and evil operate, and also how the emotional polarities of love and fear manifest. Goodness is what is, love is what is, truth is what is. We are attached to illusions which manifest as lies, fear, and evil or badness. I took the time, effort, and energy to seek and learn truth because I care for truth, what is right and good, and I received aspects of understanding thanks to those who put it out before me, just as I am doing now, putting information out for others to access. The truth acquired not only comes from others, but from the connections, correspondences, and pattern recognition your consciousness makes with the more truth that is obtained. That is why learning is important. We develop deeper understanding as more pieces of the puzzle fit together, having insights, eureka moments, etc. We can share aspects of the truth in many ways and help each other find more of that which we care for in common. More truth, goodness, morality, freedom, peace, prosperity, etc. Those of us who care for the truth at a deeper level take the time, energy, and effort and persistence to seek, discover, and embrace the truth, and then work to embody it into our being. and our daily lives until we can live by example and bring the truth to others, because we do understand, live it, and embody it to our core being. At least that's how I see it. Everything on the site so far deals with things I know because I am embodying aspects of it and understand how it works through experiential knowledge. That's compared to the fact that I don't have experiential knowledge of past events or hidden tech or other aspects of reality. But we can come to know certain degrees of probable truth regarding aspects of what has happened or is currently in existence. I've never been to Asia, but I have met Asians, so I can conclude that Asia exists. We can come to certain understandings of reality, even though we can't verify everything. And that's just a little segue on epistemology and knowing what truth is. So, truth is love, love is truth, truth unites, lies divide. Embrace truth, care for truth. That's what it's about. So that's this podcast, I guess. Hope it was informative and helped to bring some understanding about the Dualistic Conceptual Framework and how it relates to the frequencies of perception and consciousness aligning with truth. And hopefully you can understand how you've already been using this all your life. You just haven't understood it in the way that I've been explaining it. But you have been using dualistic conceptual frameworks in your life to understand things. Just maybe now you'll understand more how it works and how to apply it more frequently and more accurately in your life. I don't know. But this is how I understand things, so I hope you've gained something from it. Have a nice day. Peace.